The sky was heavy with gray clouds as people slowly made their way into the old stone church. The large wooden doors creaked as they opened and closed, letting in cold gusts of wind. Everyone inside wore dark suits and neat black dresses, their faces a mix of sadness and quiet respect. Today was the funeral of Robert Hansen, a man many spoke of with pride and admiration. In the very back of the church, almost hidden in the last pew, sat an elderly black woman. Her hat, worn and simple, shaded her eyes. Her coat looked old, with a few loose threads here and there, but she sat tall and still. She clutched a small worn-out handbag on her lap, her fingers gently tapping against it. No one seemed to notice her. Guests walked past without even a glance, too busy greeting others they knew. The church filled with soft chatter as more people arrived. Friends and family shared stories about Robert's successful business, his generous donations, and his grand parties. Laughter mixed with tears, creating a strange feeling in the air. But in the middle of all this, the old woman remained silent, like a forgotten figure in a crowded room. A group of women sitting a few rows ahead whispered to each other, their heads leaning close together. "Who is she?" one asked. "No idea," another replied. "Maybe a stranger who wandered in." An usher, a young man with a nervous smile, walked down the aisle, passing out programs. When he reached the old woman, he hesitated for a moment before quickly handing her a program and moving on without a word. She took it with a small nod, though no one noticed. The organ began to play a slow, deep tune, signaling the start of the service. People turned to face the front as the pastor walked to the podium. The pastor spoke warmly about Robert's life, mentioning his many awards, his leadership in business, and the respect he earned in the community. Heads nodded in agreement, and a few people wiped away tears. The old woman listened quietly. Her eyes, though tired, were sharp and clear. She remembered a different Robert, a boy with holes in his shoes and a hunger in his eyes. But she said nothing. This was not her moment, at least not yet. As the service continued, the woman shifted slightly in her seat. The wood of the pew creaked softly under her, but no one turned to look. It was as if she were invisible. Yet she did not seem angry or hurt. Instead, she sat with a kind of quiet patience, waiting for a moment that only she knew was coming. Outside, the sky darkened, and a light rain began to tap against the stained glass windows. Inside the church, the story of Robert Hansen's life was being told, but the most important part of the story had not yet been heard. As the pastor finished speaking, the guests began to relax a little in their seats. The heavy mood in the church lifted just slightly. People started whispering among themselves, sharing quick memories and quiet stories about Robert. Soft laughter mixed with the low hum of voices, bouncing gently off the high stone walls. But in the very back, the elderly woman remained alone. She sat quietly, watching the others with a calm and steady gaze. She seemed like a part of the old wooden pew itself, still and silent, while the rest of the church buzzed with life. Small groups of people started to glance her way. It wasn't a kind or welcoming look. It was the look people give when they are unsure, when they see someone who doesn't seem to fit in. A few furrowed their brows. Others leaned in close to their neighbors, whispering behind raised hands. "Do you know her?" A woman in a neat black dress asked the man beside her. He shook his head. "Never seen her before." Someone else said, "Maybe she's here by mistake. Poor thing." The young usher from earlier stood near the side of the church, shifting uncomfortably. He kept glancing at the old woman but didn't dare approach her. It was easier to pretend she wasn't there. The woman, Evelyn Mays, noticed the stares but showed no reaction. Her hands rested calmly on her lap, her eyes fixed on the front of the church. She wasn't there to make friends. She wasn't there to explain herself. She had a reason for being there, and she would wait for the right time. In the front rows, Robert's business partners and close friends stood up to share short speeches. They spoke about his great success, his clever mind, and his ability to turn simple ideas into fortune. Every speech painted a picture of a strong and powerful man, a leader who never needed help from anyone. The guests clapped politely after each speech, their hands coming together in soft, careful applause. Between speeches, the whispers grew louder. "She must be looking for attention," a woman said with a slight shake of her head. "Maybe she's after something," another added. narrowing her eyes suspiciously. Evelyn heard every word, but she kept her face still. She had lived a long life and had faced far worse than cold stares and careless words. Today wasn't about her pride or their opinions. It was about honoring the truth. Above them, the stained glass windows caught bits of the rainy light, casting soft colors across the room. Blue, red, and gold patterns danced on the stone floors, unnoticed by most. But Evelyn saw them. She found a small comfort in those colors, a reminder that beauty could still exist even when kindness was missing. As the speeches continued, the crowd grew more at ease, certain that the day would pass without any surprises. But Evelyn knew better. Something was coming, something that would change the way every person in that church remembered Robert Hansen. After the last speech ended, people rose from their seats and began to mingle. The sound of soft talking and gentle footsteps filled the church. A table at the side offered coffee and small cakes. Guests gathered around it, laughing quietly and sharing more stories about Robert. Evelyn Mays slowly stood up from her seat in the back. She adjusted her worn coat and carefully made her way down the aisle. Her steps were slow but steady. She moved toward a small group of people near the coffee table, hoping to share a few words about Robert, the boy she once knew. As she approached, a few heads turned. Conversations paused. Faces stiffened with polite, uneasy smiles. Evelyn smiled warmly and opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, the group shifted. One man cleared his throat and stepped in front of her, blocking her path without even realizing it. "Excuse me," she said gently, trying to get their attention. A young woman holding the cup of coffee gave a tight smile and nodded, but quickly turned away to talk to someone else. The small circle closed in on itself, leaving Evelyn standing alone again. She stood there for a moment, unsure if she should try again. A young man wearing a dark suit and shiny shoes walked by and muttered under his breath, probably just looking for a free meal. His words stunned more than he knew, but Evelyn kept her head high. She had heard far worse in her life. The coldness of the crowd wrapped around her like a heavy coat. She slowly turned away from the group and walked back toward her seat. Her steps were a little heavier now, but her spirit remained strong. She sat back down quietly, folding her hands over her handbag once more. From her seat, she watched the others. They laughed and shared memories, their faces bright with stories of Robert's successes. They talked about the big house he bought on the hill, the trips he took to faraway places, and the awards that lined his office walls. Evelyn's memories were different. She remembered a boy with torn shoes and a hungry heart, a boy who once sat at her kitchen table, eating warm bread with trembling hands, a boy who had nothing, but who dreamed of having something someday. No one here spoke of that boy. They only knew the man he became, not the journey that shaped him. They didn't know the nights he cried in fear, or the mornings he woke up unsure of what the day would bring. The rain outside grew stronger, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. It filled the silence around Evelyn like a soft drumbeat, reminding her why she was here. She wasn't here for coffee or for kind words. She was here for Robert. She was here to tell the part of this story that no one else seemed to know or wanted to remember. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, blending with the steady tapping of rain against the windows. People moved from group to group, sharing smiles and shaking hands. Many were already thinking about returning home, away from the heavy sadness of the day. Then, a sharp clink rang out through the church. The funeral director, a tall man with silver hair and a kind face, tapped his glass gently with a spoon. The sound echoed through the room, pulling everyone's attention to the front. "May I have your attention, please?" he said, his voice calm but firm. "Before we end today's service, there is one final request from Mr. Robert Hansen himself." A few guests raised their eyebrows. Some looked at each other with curious smiles. It was rare for anything unexpected to happen at a funeral, and now everyone was wondering what this final request could be. The director continued, "Robert asked that a very special person speak today, someone who played an important role in his life." He paused and looked around the room. "Mrs. Evelyn Mays, would you please come forward?" For a moment, the church fell into complete silence. All heads turned to the back of the room, where Evelyn sat alone, eyes widened. A few guests whispered quickly to one another. Evelyn did not rush. She rose slowly, smoothing the front of her coat with steady hands. Her old shoes made soft sounds against the stone floor as she walked down the aisle. The room was so quiet that her footsteps seemed louder than before. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others watched her with open curiosity, wondering how this woman, whom they had ignored all day, could possibly be important to a man like Robert Hansen. As Evelyn reached the front, the funeral director gave her a respectful nod and stepped aside. She stood at the podium, her small figure looking almost fragile against the large wooden stand. She took a deep breath, her hands resting lightly on the sides of the podium. For a moment, she said nothing. She simply looked out at the crowd, meeting the eyes of people who had moments ago turned away from her. The rain outside grew heavier, creating a soft, steady sound that filled the empty spaces between heartbeats. The colorful light from the stained glass windows touched Evelyn's coat and hat, giving her a quiet, graceful glow. And just before she began to speak, something in the room shifted. It was small but powerful, like a silent understanding that passed through the crowd. They leaned in just a little closer. They waited. They knew somehow that whatever this woman had to say would not be a simple story. It would be something important, something they needed to hear. Evelyn Mays stood at the podium, her hands resting lightly on the smooth wood. She looked out over the crowd, her eyes calm and steady. The room was still, except for the soft tapping of rain against the tall windows. Every person in the church now focused on her, waiting for her to speak. She cleared her throat gently and began, her voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Good afternoon," she said. "My name is Evelyn Mays. I am not a business partner. I am not a neighbor from the big houses on the hill. I am simply someone who knew Robert when he was very young and very different from the man you all knew." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Some guests exchanged puzzled looks. A few leaned forward, curious. Evelyn continued, her voice growing a little stronger. "Many of you knew Robert as a successful man, someone who built a fine life. But long ago, there was a boy who had nothing. No home, no family to care for him, no shoes strong enough to survive the winter streets." She paused, letting her words sink in. The guests were silent now, hanging on her every word. One cold evening, many years ago, she said, "I found a boy sitting outside a small grocery store. He was hungry, cold, and scared. He would not ask for help, but he needed it badly. I took him home that night. I gave him food. I gave him a warm bed. I gave him a place to rest his tired heart." A few people in the crowd lowered their eyes, suddenly ashamed of the way they had treated Evelyn earlier. By the way, if you find stories like this touching and want more real-life moments, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share true stories that inspire and remind us of what really matters. Evelyn smiled gently, her eyes filled with memories. "I did not know then what kind of man he would grow up to be. I only knew he needed a chance, so I gave him one." She looked around the room again, her gaze soft but full of meaning. "Robert never forgot where he came from," she said. "He promised me once that if he ever found success, he would never let pride make him forget the kindness that saved him. He built his life on the chance he was given, and today, you all see the man he became because of it." The church remained completely silent. Even the rain seemed quieter now, as if the whole world was listening to her story. Evelyn's voice grew even softer as she finished. "I did not come today for praise or attention. I came because Robert asked me to. He wanted you all to know the truth. Not just the story of his success, but the story of his beginning." Then she stepped back from the podium, her head held high, and returned quietly to her seat. After Evelyn Mays finished speaking, the church remained completely silent. No one moved. No one whispered. It was as if the whole room was frozen in a moment of deep thought. Even the sound of the rain outside seemed softer, as if nature itself was showing respect. Some guests looked down at their hands, ashamed of the way they had ignored her earlier. Others stared at Evelyn, their faces full of surprise and respect. No one had expected her story. No one had imagined that the man they praised so much had once been a lost and broken boy. The pastor stepped forward again, his face kind and thoughtful. He did not rush to speak. He gave everyone time to let Evelyn's words settle in their hearts. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat quietly in the back, her hands folded in her lap. She did not need anyone's approval. She had spoken the truth, and that was enough for her. One by one, the guests began to realize something important. Success was not just built by hard work and ambition. It was also built by kindness, by the simple, often unnoticed acts of care that could change a life forever. An older man near the front cleared his throat and stood up. His suit was crisp and his shoes shined, but his voice was humble as he spoke. "Thank you, Mrs. Mays," he said. "Thank you for reminding us where greatness truly begins." Others nodded in agreement. A few people wiped their eyes, touched by the honesty of her story. Small groups started to talk quietly, but this time the words were different. They spoke about how important it was to remember the struggles behind every success. They talked about the power of kindness and second chances. One woman whispered to her friend, "I can't believe we almost ignored her. She's the reason he made it." A young man near the door looked thoughtful and said, "We should all hope to have someone like her in our lives." The atmosphere in the church changed. Where before there had been coldness and distance, now there was warmth and understanding. Evelyn's words had done more than just tell a story. They had opened people's hearts. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. The gray clouds began to break apart, letting in thin streams of sunlight that shined through the stained glass windows. The colors on the stone floor grew brighter, painting the church in soft reds, blues, and golds. Evelyn watched quietly as people talked and smiled more warmly. She had done what she came to do. She had honored Robert's wish. She had reminded everyone that behind every strong man or woman, there is often a hand that lifted them up when they could not stand alone. And in doing so, she gave everyone in that church something precious, something they would carry with them long after the day was over. After a few more moments of quiet conversation, people began to move toward Evelyn. It started slowly. One or two at first, then small groups. They came with shy smiles and lowered heads, their voices soft and respectful. An older woman with gray hair and kind eyes reached out and gently touched Evelyn's arm. "Thank you for coming today," she said. "Your words meant more than you know." Evelyn smiled warmly but said little. She was never one for many words. She believed actions spoke louder. Soon, others followed. Some apologized for ignoring her earlier. Some simply nodded in thanks, not trusting their voices. The young usher who had once looked at her with confusion now stood before her with a serious face. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "I should have been kinder." Evelyn patted his hand gently. "It's never too late to be kind," she said. As more people gathered around, the mood in the church softened even more. Laughter returned, but it was not the nervous laughter from before. It was warm and full, the kind that comes when hearts have been touched. People began to share their own stories, small memories of times when someone had helped them in ways they had almost forgotten. It was as if Evelyn's story had opened a door inside each of them, allowing old, precious memories to come rushing back. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air was fresh and cool, and patches of blue sky peeked through the gray clouds. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the colors of the stained glass dance across the floor. Evelyn looked around the church and felt a quiet peace settle over her. She hadn't come for praise. She hadn't come for thanks. But seeing the change in the people around her filled her heart with a gentle joy. The funeral director approached her with a small, respectful bow. He handed her a simple envelope. "Mr. Hanson left this for you," he said. Evelyn took it carefully. She opened it and found a handwritten note inside. It said, "Thank you for giving me my first home. You gave me a future when I had none. With all my heart, thank you, Robert." Evelyn held the note close for a moment. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. This was not a time for sadness. It was a time for remembering and being grateful. Around her, the guests began to slowly leave the church, their goodbyes quieter and their hugs a little tighter. The day had started with heavy hearts, but it was ending with hope and a better understanding of the power of kindness. Evelyn stood and carefully placed the note in her handbag. She took one last look around the church, smiled softly to herself, and began to make her way toward the door, stepping into the fresh, rain-washed afternoon. As Evelyn stepped outside the church, the fresh smell of rain greeted her. The ground was still wet, and little puddles shimmered in the sunlight. The air felt cool and clean, washing away the heaviness of the day. She walked slowly down the church steps, her old shoes making soft sounds against the stone. She held her handbag close, feeling the note from Robert inside. It was a small thing, but to her, it was worth more than gold. A few guests passed by, offering her small nods and gentle smiles. One young woman even hurried after her and offered to hold an umbrella over her head, though the rain had already stopped. "Thank you, dear," Evelyn said kindly, but she shook her head. "I think I'll enjoy the sunshine." The young woman smiled and watched her walk away, feeling a little lighter herself. Evelyn did not rush. She took her time, walking along the narrow path that led through the small garden beside the church. Flowers glistened with raindrops. Birds, hidden among the trees, sang sweet songs as if they, too, were celebrating something special. For a moment, Evelyn paused near a wooden bench. She sat down and took a deep breath, letting the clean air fill her lungs. She looked up at the sky, now painted with soft blue and white clouds. As she sat there, she thought about Robert, not the man with awards and fine clothes, but the boy who once needed a warm meal and a kind hand. She thought about how far he had come, and how even in death, he had stayed true to his promise, to remember the beginning and honor the kindness that helped him grow. Evelyn smiled to herself. She knew that the real measure of a person was not in how much they gathered, but in how much they gave. Robert had given much, and in the end, he had given her something too, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could echo across a lifetime. She sat for a while longer, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, hearing the soft songs of birds, and watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze. Finally, she stood up and adjusted her coat. She was not sad. She was proud. Proud to have been part of a story that ended with hope and kindness instead of sorrow. As she walked away from the church, her steps were light. She was ready to continue her journey, knowing that kindness never truly ends. It moves from heart to heart, from life to life, leaving the world just a little better than before. And somewhere in the bright blue sky above, it almost felt like Robert was smiling too.